was to create a world where culture could keep going permanently. And we're not going to get that done if we don't educate the children, the youth. So that's a key thing. And so the question is, well, how do you do that? And there are lots of ways you can do that. But both Jessica and Carol have done a lot of work in that area. And so I thought I'd start and let Carol talk about what she's done and talk a little bit about her experience. I think I ran into you in mid-90s, it seems to me, as you were volunteering, and you were a school teacher at that time, as I recall.
Actually, I was in training to become a teacher. Yeah, so I wasn't a teacher yet.
But you did become one, though, right? Is that right? And then ended up being, as Urban Harvest developed a position, you went to work there. And I guess at this point, you're now, after having worked with a lot of schools, have become the director of education, I think, at Urban Harvest. So you're over permaculture classes and everything else at this point. And background of interest in permaculture going way, way back, and then gradually working on a certificate, which I think you're going to finish off this summer, but I looked it up and you were 2006, 2007, you almost got there. I think it's cool that you're going to finish this off in 2021. My own history with PDC was something like that as well. With that, let's get you 10 minutes at least and a little bit longer if you need it. Tell us a little bit about your background with this, and then whatever you want to say about the challenges and pleasures and opportunities working with youth and permaculture concepts.
Hello, I am Carol Burton, born and raised here in Houston, Texas. And after I had my degree, earned my degree from the University of Houston in painting, studio art, I was interested in health and nutrition because I had a huge health issue that was ongoing, and that was cystic acne. And so that quest to attain health and to try to heal my skin, because it was on the surface. I couldn't hide it. I couldn't ignore it. It was right there on the surface. To heal myself was this journey that I decided that I would get a job at Whole Foods, and because I wanted to learn about herbs. So I was full immersion, and I got a job there, and I started to study herbs and healing and natural health by using myself as the guinea pig, so to speak, but also to investigate so I could have firsthand experience. And so I read all the nutrition books, and the key thing in these books about nutrition and diet and food planning was a common key element was to grow a garden. And I've always been interested in having a garden my entire life, but as a child, but not successfully. And my efforts were the first time gardener efforts, as a kid, was taking a seed and planting it right in the middle of the yard and the grass. And then asking my dad, like, why doesn't it grow? Why is nothing happening? But my sister, who tossed aside a tomato discard, I remember clearly, I was mad at her for littering and being lazy by just tossing it off the porch. And a couple months later, there was a tomato plant growing there. And so again, I asked my dad, I was like, what is that? How did that tomato plant get here? He was like, well, how do you think it got here? Like, have we been eating tomatoes? And so that was like a key moment in which I was just a little bit floored as a child. Like, why are we not growing food everywhere? Like, this is so easy. We can do it. This was an accidental tomato plant. Why can't we do it? So that driving question for me in terms of in our environment, why can't we have beauty and flowers and raspberries growing over a trellis?
Good food.
Because I had seen it in Waller, Texas, when my dad, who is a hobby rancher, was right next door to a retired farmer, and that was his personal garden. And he had these amazing raspberries and fruits and vegetables that he just knew how to grow, but he didn't take it to market. So we got to go and visit on weekends and just run around in this Garden of Eden, so to speak. And so now, fast forward, as a painter, I thought that my dream as a painter would be that I could be a commentary activist through art. Then within that realm of art, there are just so many egos that I knew that that wasn't the place. I really wanted to go back to somehow work with children and have an impact in bringing beauty and inspiration to communities. So this aspect of public spaces, community spaces, this is what has kind of drawn me into service, because from my family, as in terms of being the demographics of blue collar and working class households, we did not volunteer recreationally. It was usually we would go to the ranch and we would go there, and then my dad on the weekends would also work. So during the week he would work, and then on the weekends we'd go to the ranch and hang out there while he worked and build things, and sort of connected us to the land. And now for public school, I'd have to say that I was very intimidated about stepping foot again on an elementary school, public school campus. And as the book buyer for Urban Harvest, since I was not Urban Harvest, but for Whole Foods, I was researching books and health. And that was when I heard Bob Randall on Rice Radio being interviewed about Urban Harvest and community gardens. And so that was when every book had said to eat seasonally, grow a garden. And I called immediately to volunteer. And I called the office and I volunteered with Bob in the original office. And my first job was sorting seeds. And he did ask me what was my goal, what did I want to learn? And I stated that I wanted to work with kids. And he said, oh, we'll go and volunteer at Browning Elementary. You could go there out in the field on behalf of Urban Harvest. But I did not at that time because, again, I had not been on an elementary school campus since, like elementary school. And I volunteered with Urban Harvest in the teaching garden. So Bob Brandel was my first mentor in the garden and really inspired me to look at our food system and where food was coming from and ask those questions that is so prevalent now is it local, conventional, or organic from California? I mean, that was like the first question I asked him, because we would have those discussions in Whole Foods in the nutrition department, because folks would come in and they'd say, oh, I want to eat local, but I want to eat organic. Oh, well, I just heard on the radio that St. John's wort is good for you, so I want to buy it now. Where is it? So just the power of media was influencing the public and coming in and seeking alternatives to health. So that was a core motivator for me to change my lifestyle and also want to connect to growing food. And in the teaching garden, I was able to do that. And that was grow food. That was like alongside Bob Randall, and look at seasonally in a community garden, in a community space with other volunteers. So then I felt that I had enough skill and experience to bring to a school garden. And so during this time, I pursued the track of becoming certified to be a teacher. I was going through the alternative certification process to be a special ed teacher, and I worked with early childhood. So I did work in Aldine ISD, and that's the school district I graduated from high school. So I like going full circle just within my own 4 square feet of working directly in my backyard, because Houston is so vast. And so in Aldine ISD, while I volunteered in the teaching garden, if we planted carrots and we had a little courtyard space, I would go and plant carrots with my students. So I sort of did that. I kind of volunteered in the teaching garden, and whatever we were doing, I would bring that back and I would do it with the students. I didn't ask permission. I just started gardening outside in the courtyards that we had. And then I offered to do an after school club. So as a volunteer, I had an after school garden art club where we made art, and then we also gardened. And at the same time, Urban Harvest was looking for an after-school instructor, and that was when the program started in 2003, that I was brought on board to teach as an after-school garden educator. And so Urban Harvest, just through the resources of community gardens, education, and classes, I got to build up enough skill and confidence to go into the public school system and to bring this knowledge and work to the students. Because I did see many campuses that were not biodiverse, were basically, unfortunately, I equate it to many public institutions and schoolyards looking very similar to prison yards, where you have nothing, you have zero diversity, and then you do have a man-made playground. And so the research out right now is that they have taken the same group of children, and this is part of the nature deficit disorder author's research that he wrote about, the same school, the same children in 2 different types of landscapes landscapes. When they're playing in a man-made structure, their play is very structured and they enforce the rules that they create. And they usually have the kids who play the role of enforcers, enforcing the rules in this man-made structure. But when they're in nature and they have creativity, the leaders become the ones who are the most creative. So that's just very touching to me, because right now, if you think of our government and dictatorships that take over, they're very militarized. And so if we do incorporate and really teach children at a very young age, not just teach them, but what we're doing right now is providing a whole wraparound service in terms of now partnering with the school. We're after school, then we're also going to partner with our school so that we can facilitate community work days and bring in the community. And very often in the toughest neighborhoods with the most economic challenges, we're not able to bring in a very strong parent component. And so that is when we really rely on the resources of this entire city, because then we have the moms in Cypress, Texas, who are running Generation Serve. They are actually getting in their cars by the carload and coming to volunteer with us on work days and working alongside of us, and then going back to their own neighborhoods and doing the same thing that we're doing in school gardens. And that's running a school garden work day so that we have a little workshop component where you're learning whatever we're planting, turning the compost. It's either preparing a snack from the garden. And we partner with UT School of Public Health. Right now, Sam Houston, dietetic interns are rotating with us. And so they're the ones who we can now have lead those nutrition tastings. And also at the middle school that we partner with, it's pre-K through 8th grade. And so in the past 2 years, we've had students who started in pre-K that have now graduated or in high school. And they've come back to the garden work days that we've had, because that is their capstone project for high school. And that's bringing gardening or creating a garden at their school. So looking at that, and then I hope that the next phase will be within the realm of permaculture, that we can take our permaculture classes and incorporate more teachers so we can focus on the train the trainer aspect of bringing teachers to us and also possibly to them for workshops to become inspired and to get the certification for permaculture, then to bring that knowledge back to their schools. It's to plant one radish seed from seed to harvest with a student. We really do need a biodiverse community of support. And so I feel very fortunate that I've been able to work with Urban Harvest and within the public school realm to be a catalyst to bring together key component of funding to fund ongoing programming, and then also within the city to bring other partners who are interested in supporting these efforts. And so I do need to speak to the garden educators who are teaching at the schools through our grant partnerships and our services, since we became a certified provider of professional development for the district and an approved vendor for Harris County Department of Education and Houston Independent School District, that we train our garden educators so that they have the resources to go into the schools to teach the students, and then also to just informally and formally work with the teachers to support outdoor classrooms. So there are usually 12 garden educators who work with us per year. About 4 of them are core who have been with us since we expanded and started. And then the others sort of rotate in and out as they're going through graduate school, or they just need a part-time job right now. And this is what they love doing until they launch into other positions within Houston.
Wow. Thank you. Let's go to Jessica, and then we'll come back for questions and discussion after that. What to say about Jessica? Jessica has tried to do something in Galveston. That's one of the interesting things. She took her PDC in, I calculated 2014. Did I get that right? Yes. And she's been really active again in art and permaculture, both. She teaches art online. If you want art courses, I'm sure we can connect you with that class as well. But when you try to get something going in a school system, it's an entirely different kettle of fish than what Carol was talking about. Was basically after about 10 years of messing around trying to figure out how to get the school districts interested. And I think I started in 1988 on school, so it was like, yikes. But I didn't understand what we were doing in the beginning or what schools really were. Well, anyhow, Jessica, what did I come up with? You gave me a list of things you've done, but you basically started working on one school garden, I think it was initially, and then after some spending time in Mexico and so on, got back involved in Galveston as part of the Young Gardens program, which is part of the Galveston Farmers Market, I think you told me, and ultimately designed a curriculum and program garden designs and so on for 6 schools in Galveston. So that's trying to get similar sort of thing going there. And then you ran into COVID, and I don't know where that stands at this point, but I know you've been doing way more teaching of art than you have been doing schools just lately. But COVID is hopefully disappearing, and maybe there's still some hope there. You want to elaborate on how you got into all this stuff and what you found out?
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Bob. And if anything, COVID taught us the value of having outdoor, airy classrooms where kids can spread out. But yes, so I'm Jessica Antonelli, originally from Galveston, Texas, born and raised. And Carol, I heard so many similarities in our stories. I'm also an artist, and my passion for school gardens started with teaching art in the garden. And I wanted to share some pictures. It's nice to finally have some people to share my way too many garden pictures with. So I started teaching as an art teacher for all school grades. You know how they like to send us art teachers from kindergarten all the way to high school. I started doing that in 2011, and the science teacher said, "Hey, there's this exciting grant. Let's not just have this be a science school garden, but an art and science garden." I got so excited. We founded it. A couple months later, she got pregnant and disappeared, and it was just me in the garden. So fortunately, around that time, I was also taking my PDC with Urban Harvest. And I was so happy to get to bounce ideas back and forth and apply what I was learning in the PDC to growing the garden. So that was all happening at around the same time. And by the time we finished, or by the time I eventually ended up leaving that school garden, we had raised over $7,000 in grants, some from actually about half of it, at least from the Whole Foods Foundation. And not only were the art students doing a good portion of their art activities outside, but I was also able to connect to the other teachers and find ways to overlap common interests so that all of the kids in the school were using the school garden. I felt like that was the biggest win. So my motivation for starting this school garden was kind of selfish, to be honest. I was in this dark room with fluorescent lighting and no windows. And I think that's the case for so many teachers. And it gets to you as the teacher, and God knows it's affecting our students as well, just as Carol mentioned, how much our environment shapes the experience and the learning that the students attain. So we got out there in the garden, and it's so simple to find ways to incorporate all academic curricula into garden learning. And so as the art teacher, I was always required to go to the big faculty meetings, and the only thing they talk about are the standardized tests and what the scores are. That's all those meetings are about. When I was teaching, the current lingo was hotspots. For the STAR tests, each grade and each teacher has a list of certain areas that their students aren't progressing. So they call them the red zones or the hot spots, where the grades are not where they want them to be. And pretty much these faculty meetings are how can we get these hot spots incorporated into the curriculum. So that was what I did to really start making the school garden something that every single teacher was excited about and was willing to start going outside and learning about, even though they were so busy. If you can connect it to that thing that they, need to fix in order to have success in their own job, then it's like all the doors open. People are excited to support the garden and to work with you. So that helped us get more funding. And in the end, we were able to see an improvement in the students' learning, especially with measurement. That is probably at least in the school I was at, that was one of the skills that the children most struggled with. Using rulers, being aware of like volume, and, you know, oh my goodness, there's so many ways to measure in the garden, everything from the beds and their area to the length of an earthworm. I mean, there's so many fun ways to incorporate that. So we won lots of awards. The principal was 1,000% behind us, and it was a huge win. And so for me, you know, the best thing was just seeing the kids out in the garden. But if we had to get all these standardized test scores up in order for them to get out there, it was all worth it. But this like idyllic scene was kind of interrupted when the school needed to move. So because Galveston is, of course, Hurricane Alley, the school had so much damage after Ike that it was just kind of bouncing around. The students had to continuously move, and we were basically leaving the garden I'd spent years working on. I was already pretty much ready to go, so I went ahead and moved to Mexico. But this is just an example of the challenges of this champion teacher model, as it's called in some school garden circles. If you have one teacher who's really passionate, who drives the whole thing, like, okay, on the one hand, that can do great things and you can have a wonderful, thriving school garden. But there was nothing that was able to sustain that when we moved the school building and I left the school. So the garden program went totally fallow. However, Mexico, it's, you know, I'm up here in the high desert, getting my hands in the dirt. About 5 years after I was a teacher, I came back to work with the nonprofit, the Young Gardeners Program, which is just an incredible, stellar example of school gardening at work, incredible leadership team. I can't say enough good things. If you want to connect with anybody there, please let me know. So I signed on as the garden manager. So I was really in charge of the planting plans and honestly teaching the teachers how to teach gardening, how to garden, because they came on as teachers, not as expert planters. And it's just such an incredible program. It's a seed to plate after school program. We really do our best to make sure it's the kids themselves that are planting each individual seed. They grow it, and then we also do a cooking program once a month. They cook what they eat. And every week we send home, ideally, at least a couple of pounds of produce with each student. One of the things that just makes my heart sing about the Young Gardeners program is it is social permaculture in action. There is such a strong focus on relationships and putting yourself in the shoes and really trying to think about all of the stakeholders, all of the people who are involved in this, and really connecting to them. Relationships were always number one. And we felt that very strongly as a team, a leadership team, which helped us take risks, do scary things, transition when COVID hit. One thing that I loved about our training for the leadership team was the book Farming While Black was required reading for all of us, which a great book from Soulfire Farms. Also recommend that one. Since most of Galveston student population is Black and brown, primarily Hispanic and Black, it was important for us to understand what farming and gardening means to different cultures and communities. And this awareness really had very practical changes to what we grew. So we started off with sort of like a list of things that we would like to grow, but through continuing the conversation with our families who are receiving this food, we started to realize a lot of the produce was getting just thrown away whenever it came home. And so through surveys, through conversations, through teaching the kids and families how to cook, we realized that there was a culturally appropriate produce that we needed to be growing that would be a better fit for our families and like actually have them eating the food at home. So that also, it was different depending on the school. Each school has a slightly different planting plan that the garden leader decides on based on the needs and requests and culture of its population. So for one school, it's like kale and beets. For another school, it's collards. Things that everybody always loves are like watermelon and sweet peas. When COVID hit, I was still there, and it was really a humbling and beautiful experience to see them shift. Not smoothly, it was rough and it was ugly and there's lots of crying. But we had suddenly no students who used to do all the garden work, but we called on our volunteers. We staggered our volunteer shifts so that people weren't all on top of each other. And we asked the school district what it wanted and how the gardens could be a service, and they said, we need food. So we distributed food directly to the families who were involved in our program and to local food banks. I think in the end, one of the most special things for me was that we eventually did come back and start a garden, a new garden at the school garden where I once taught when I very first got started. So it was kind of a lovely little circling back. But unlike when I was a teacher there, to have a garden program that spans a whole school district and has resources that it can pull from other like multi-school garden programs, so much more valuable than that champion teacher model. Because if there's one problem in one garden, there's that security net to help everybody out. And because of that, we were able to reach out not only to our school gardens, but other community gardens. This is Farm Dirt all the way in Houston is one of our community partners that was very generous. And of course, just gave us the best soil ever. And yeah, kids always enjoyed it too. So I think that's my spiel.
Yes, really cool. Both of you, very interesting journeys. And I could certainly see a lot of similarities with my own childhood when you're discussing, both of you, some of what inspired you and what is inspiring them.
For clarity, Jessica, just thank you for that presentation. It's just like wonderful to see all the kids out in the garden and how it's grown from your champion teacher perspective to working with a nonprofit to support a network of schools for the district. Are you still with Growing Gardeners, with Young Gardeners of Houston? Because I thought you used the past tense term, so that's what I wanted to check.
Yeah, I'm no longer working with them. I do occasionally come in and do, like, now that I'm focusing on my art, I painted like a mural for them, but I typed the name in the chat. It's the Young Gardeners program, and they are part of the Galveston's own farmers market, and just like the best. Such big fans. I'm a big fan of them.
Which, of course,
Yeah.
Urban Harvest is also part of a Houston farmers market program, although actually that's part of the schools program also. But basically both of those are joined together in both places, which is kind of interesting.
And then I can say that Nan Wilson, who probably trained you, Jessica, she came and she took our Edible Academy, our summer Edible Academy, when she was just starting out. And then the next summer, she was able to send her volunteers, because it was all volunteer based at that time, to the Edible Academy the next year until y'all have sort of expanded to develop your own leadership program, which is awesome.
Let's say something about my daughter, Amy, is a teacher at Pin Oak Special Ed. And when she started working there 14 years ago, 12 years ago, she wanted to have a garden, but she knew how difficult that is, having a home garden and how much work it is. And so what she did is she did exactly that. She started finding out who in the school wants to participate with staff. And it was, the maintenance people, mainly. And so she started a garden club. And so there were students that came to the garden club weekly. The staff of the school who were interested came there, and they met for a whole year and talked about what they wanted. And then they planted 2 fruit trees. And the next year they planted an herb garden. And the next year they added a vegetable bed. So they went really slow, and they brought in the parents as well along the way. So that was just the model that she chose to follow. It worked pretty well.
Well, I could mention a few classic ones that I just from the archives of this stuff. One of the first school gardens I worked with was Garden Oaks Elementary, I think it was. And in the late 80s, we had a garden there, and it was a pretty good garden, but the principal eventually decided that they would rather have a running track where the garden was. So we moved the garden to a piece of municipal land, I think it was, probably still there now. But many years later, I think Garden Oaks put in a school garden. Am I right? Carol, you would know that, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes. So that was one of my first years when I came on board full time, was that we partnered with Garden Oaks Montessori through a grant with the Garden Club of Houston. So that was like the grant that sponsored their school garden. And because of things of that nature, we did have meetings with the teachers and the principal, and the teachers were very honest at the school, because I'd gone to other meetings with teachers and they said, yes, we would like that. Yes, 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 we will do that. Just sort of like the interview application process. But they were very honest, and they said, we don't want to say yes because we don't want to avoid you later and hide, because we know that we're not going to be able to keep up with this. We have to be honest. Like we want to maintain our friendship and eye contact. And so they had some experience, in knowing how that a labor of love. But so we adapted the program to being the first during school visiting garden educator. So we created that model with Garden Oaks Montessori and through that grant, and it was for 3 years. And it was for 3 years, and that was part of the expectation and understanding that after 3 years, the school would take over the project and be the lead in managing the garden. And they did, but we have managed to find funding each year, either myself through after school program funding or the PTO, who has come forward the past 2 years or so. They don't make a commitment for long term, but they call me at the last minute and say, okay, our fundraiser was so successful, we want to partner again, and everybody would love to have you come back. And their garden, since it's now, Bob, an environmental magnet school, they have environmental projects all over the campus, and that is their focus. So they have a huge water catchment tank and well and wetland garden, and they did have to build over their orchard because they had a new wing put in. But so we're working with the school to replant the orchard.
What school is that?
Garden Oaks Montessori.
Okay.
I could share some other interesting kinds of vignettes. My wife worked for 15 years or so with Nancy's up there. I don't know how many years you worked for communities and schools, but one time there was how many?
15.
15, yeah. So one time there was a workshop for counselors in the CIS, and they had a Spring Shadows Elementary principal there talking about the role the garden had played, among other things. And he credited the garden with getting people to stop firing bullets into the back of the school, which I thought was a kind of stunning crime fighting piece of information. I mean, it sounds awful, of course, but this is Texas. So a couple interesting ones. We saw, we had one elementary school garden where at one point I asked the main teacher that was working with kids in the garden what he thought the advantage of it was. And he said that most of these children will come to fourth grade or whatever it was and do whatever it is the teacher says because the parent told them to do what the teacher says. But in the garden, they connect what they're learning in classroom with what they're doing that they want to do in the garden. And so they understand that the learning program is actually useful to them. So they're actually learning for a different reason than just because they were told to follow instructions. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I didn't learn that till 9th grade. So that's cool if you could learn it when in 4th grade. I mean, I really had no clue that I was doing this other than to please teachers and parents until 9th grade, but one teacher made a huge amount of difference in my life. And another one was basically they had some middle school kids who had been really, D students who turned around their grades in a very short period of time and in the garden. And so one of our staff asked them why why do they think they had gotten so much better at school? And she basically said, well, you pointed out that if I couldn't grow beans, I probably shouldn't have a family anytime soon. And basically some responsibilities. And she said, that made me think that I really needed to start paying attention. I don't know if that's a good learning thing, but I thought it was very interesting that they went from a D level grade to a B plus in one term in math.